Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Mirza Ismail was always feeling a little bad that Bangalore doesn't have a fairy fountain. He called them fairy fountains. So he was always looking for some money from somewhere to make a fairy fountain in Bangalore. Around that time, he was approached by the Maharani of Bajang. Bajang is a principality in Nepal, and she was living in Bangalore. She had made a home in Bangalore. She approached him and said, "Sir Mirza, I have this parrot, this pet parrot. Okay, very crazy about her parrot. And she said, after I'm gone, should something happen to me, will you promise to take care of my parrot?" So Sir Mirza said, okay. And then she said, no, because you have this space in Lal Bagh. Would you put it there and have my parrot taken care of? And Sir Mirza said, Your Royal Highness, please don't worry about the parrot. We'll definitely take care of it. Because she was pressing into his hands a sum of 5,000 rupees. And he said, I'll take care of your parrot. But can I use this money for something else? He said, I want to set up a fairy fountain in Cubbon Park. Where else? Cubbon Park. So she said, okay. And he started work towards it. And then she left for Bombay with her parrot and was never heard of again.
Over 150 years ago, in 1870, a public park was inaugurated in Bangalore. Designed by British engineer Richard Sankey, it spread over 100 acres and encompassed features typical to the city: granite outcrops, lush greenery, wide avenues, and government buildings. Originally named Meade's Park, it has been known to generations of Bangaloreans as Cubbon Park. Sanctuary, lung space, thoroughfare, battlefield, picnic spot, repository of urban biodiversity, and public park. In this episode of BIC Talks, author and ecologist Harini Nagendra speaks to author and co-founder of BangaloreWALKS Roopa Pai about her book, Cubbon Park, The Green Heart of Bangalore, as they attempt to decode the enduring appeal of the park. This conversation was adapted from a Bangalore Literature Festival session that took place in 2022.
I heard about the book. I had the fortune of listening to a short preview at a friend's home when she had called us for dinner a few weeks ago. So at Priya's house, if I can say, Roopa gave us what I call a masala version of how she came about to write the book. And when we were putting together the outline for this talk, I said, Roopa, can you start with the masala version? She said, what is that? So I reminded her of all this. But can you tell us why Cubbon Park and why the book?
I think in Bangalore, we are very, very privileged to have two wonderful green lung spaces right in the heart of our city. Not many cities have this, particularly in India. I think we should all be aware of that very few cities have this, and we have two. And actually, we forget about the Bangalore traffic and everything. They are very close to each other. In fact, Sir M.V. had this wonderful idea, which was never implemented. Sir M. Vishveshwaraya, former erstwhile Diwan of Mysore, he had this wonderful idea of connecting the two by a green corridor so that people could start in Cubbon Park and walk to Lal Bagh. Imagine how lovely that would have been, but it didn't happen. Why did I come to write this book? It's a good question. It's also a good question, why didn't I write a book like this earlier? Because my husband founded this company called BangaloreWALKS. Yeah, at least 16 years ago. And I joined him almost immediately, and I do the children's walks. We do history and heritage walks around Bangalore and Karnataka. Given that I'm such a big fan of Bangalore, third generation Bangalorean, again, very rare species. When I do walks for children, I always start by asking them, how many of you were born in Bangalore? And usually quite a few hands go up. Then how many of your parents were born in Bangalore? Significantly fewer hands. So that is how I begin the story, by to emphasize that, so many people in Bangalore have come from outside, have embraced the city, and equally the city has embraced them, and they feel comfortable enough to live here. Speaking Tree, the publishing house, had begun to bring out hyper-local books in different cities. Earlier, if you remember, the trend used to be one book on Bangalore, one book on Bombay, kind of Lonely Planet type of things, but also deeply about the culture and everything. Speaking Tiger decided that they would bring out hyper-local books on neighborhoods in cities so that we could do a deep dive into understanding the culture of a particular neighborhood. So they had already come out in Delhi with two books. One was on the Chandni Chowk and one was on Connaught Place. In Bombay, they had two books, one on Shivaji Park and one on Colaba. And then she was looking for someone to write on a neighborhood in Bangalore. because I'm her friend, she's edited earlier books of mine and I run part of Bangalore Walks. So she thought of me and said, would you like to write a book on any particular neighborhood in Bangalore? And of course, like, as I've said in the book, every time somebody mentions Bangalore to me, my head begins to nod. Like, yes, it's an affirmative. Yes, of course. Anything to do with Bangalore, yes, I'm ready to do it. But then she said, the difficult question was, which neighborhood do you want to write about? And you would think that being such a passionate Bangalorean, I would be spoiled for choice. Like, which one would I pick? I love this also, I love that also. But when I began to think about it, I said, which is the one place that has not changed in the sense, I feel the same way towards it as I did when I was a child. I feel the same love towards it or whatever. And when I began to think like that, the choices became slimmer and slimmer. I grew up in Malleshwaram. I went to school there, I went to college there. But while I continue to have wonderful memories, it doesn't hold me like it used to anymore because I moved away. So I said, okay, not Malleshwaram. Then I said, should I write about where I have lived for 10 years, which was Airport Road. And I'm like, that's not a neighborhood. So, okay, not there. Then where can I write about? Would it be MG Road? Because I've talked about MG Road on my Bangalore walks for ages, talked about what happened there, the history, this, that. But it was a place you went to and then you returned. You didn't live there, it didn't hold you. So Deshna was like, my God, this girl is really stressing here because I was like, which one should I write about? And then she said, it doesn't have to be like a conventional neighborhood. You can think about writing about maybe like Lal Bagh. And as she said Lal Bagh, the words that came out of my mouth were Cubbon Park. Because Lal Bagh, many books have been written about Lal Bagh. It has always been a pampered park, celebrated. It started off as a Sultan's pleasure garden, started off by Hyder Ali. Then the British botanists from Kew Gardens cared for it. The Maharaja of Mysore cared for it. It's always been protected. There's a wall around it. You have to pay a ticket to get in. Like, it's a very special park. But Cubbon Park has always been everybody's park. I just said Cubbon Park, but when I began to think about it, I said, my God, this is the place that has actually, I have not felt any different towards it as I did when I was a child, when I was brought there to ride on the Putani Express and be given popcorn and cotton candy. That same kind of nostalgic love I felt for it when, also a new thing I realized, Sudeshna, which you don't know about, but I was born on the fringes of Cubbon Park. I was born at St. Martha's Hospital. I went to college at UVC. My dad was a member of Century Club in Cubbon Park. And then I moved after marriage to the other side, equidistant from Cubbon Park as my parents' house, on the other side, in the cantonment. So whenever I had to go from one house to the other, I had to pass through Cubbon. It was always on the way to somewhere. And I went away for a few years, lived everywhere, came back and brought my children to Cubbon Park, who fell in love with it just the same way I had. So that became a nice family place. And then now that the children have grown up and gone, I take my dog there twice a week because it's the only park that allows dogs. It's welcoming to dogs. So now I go there and I said, my God, I have never stopped coming to Cubbon Park and it has always made space for me in its heart. And that's why I chose to write about Cubbon. Very long answer.
No, but this is the masala story that I wanted. So for me, as an ecologist, I see so many intersections with so many kinds of Cubbon Park. There is the side of Cubbon Park, which is all the museums, the Vishweshwara Museum, then the aquarium, the government museum, all of those. Those of you interested in Bangalore history, you should look for the Begur 592, this stone, which is the stone of a very large battle at Begur, which was actually described in another hero stone as the Battle of Bengaluru, one of the oldest inscriptions. So there's lots of fascinating history in that side of Cubbon Park. But then you go to the other side, there's Upneer and Kunte, which you write about.
Yeah.
There's the fact that the park was carved out of the backwaters of Sampangi Lake.
Yeah.
And then there is that Katte where there's Kamadevaru and Kamadevaru's Hunnime. They put these cutouts of Kama and Rathi. And they do these indigenous forms of worship that survive there. Then you have, the bamboos and the vegetation, which is more native, so to speak. You have the toy train. Then you have the very British landscape part of the garden. I mean, the Century Club, which is, quintessentially Indian British times. So I thought it was a very fascinating choice. And you're right, as soon as I saw the book, I was wondering, why has there been no book on Cubbon Park where there are so many books on Lal Bagh, and what a rich choice this is,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So with this, I thought maybe can we ask you to do a quick reading of the book so that the audience gets a little flavor of what I liked really is the way you've melded history and personal memory.
Yeah.
And so I thought that reading would be nice.
Thank you. Sure. Okay, I'll start off with the opening chapter itself. So I think for me, this was sort of the pivotal sort of incident in the last 50 years that has happened in Cubbon Park, and that's why I wanted to start with that. In September 1998, and the worst part was I wasn't living in Bangalore at that time, so I missed this whole thing, and that's why it was even more fascinating to me. In September 1998, almost a quarter of a century ago now, a legislation passed by the Karnataka government galvanized the citizens of an entire city into extraordinary and unprecedented action. It was one of those watershed moments when that amorphous amassment of people, passions, and priorities that has earned the right to call itself a city pauses briefly in its ceaseless pulling in 100 different directions at once and coalesces spontaneously and seemingly irrationally into a single-pointed, high-intensity laser beam intent on achieving a common goal. What made this coming together of Bangalore particularly remarkable was what was at stake. Not public health or safety, not a lack of water or electricity, not garbage pileups or potholed roads or traffic congestion, all chronic Bangalore afflictions, but 32 acres, or 44 acres depending on who you asked, of a park. The people's protests of 1998 were against the government's arbitrary denotification of those 32 acres, a move that stripped that parcel of land of the protection it had hitherto enjoyed under the Karnataka Government Parks Preservation Act of 1975 and laid it open to appropriation and redevelopment by the government and other influential parties. What was also remarkable was the manner of the coming together. The issue brought thousands of ordinary and celebrity citizens out of their homes and into the streets and inspired journalists across the spectrum to lay aside their differences and back the public against the establishment. The protests went on for weeks and weeks, but never crossed the line from civil engagement into violence or from constitutional legal battles into vigilantism. It is important to clarify that this was no ordinary park. This was a historic, then 128-year-old park, one of two heritage lung spaces of the city. It must also be revealed right at the outset that despite all their sweat, toil, and tears, the citizens did not succeed in persuading the government to roll back the legislation. This story, after all, is an Indian story, which characteristically takes long and roundabout routes to a messy denouement that neither side totally loves, but grudgingly accepts for the interim. In that sense, that 1998 episode was not what you might call a victory for the city, but one would be hard-pressed to call it a defeat either. For that kind of inflection point in a city's history does far more than impact its future. In a million big and little ways, it also rewires its imagination. With the Save Cubbon Park protests, a specific idea of what it meant to be part of this particular city took root, and a bar to live up to had been set. Which begs the question, what makes Cubbon Park so important, so meaningful, and so beloved? More importantly, what makes it so central to the city? Well, there is its physical location. Historically, the park lay at the intersection of two entirely different ways of life, the Bangalore Cantonment, administered by the British, and the Bangalore Pete, or city, administered by the Maharaja of Mysore, making it a no man's land between oppressor and oppressed, soldiers and civilians, foreigners and natives, tea drinkers and coffee drinkers, largely church and mosque goers and largely temple goers, Tamil and Urdu speakers and Kannada speakers, because the elite on both sides, then as now, spoke English. After independence, when H. Narasimha of National College is reputed to have said, even the dogs are English medium dogs. After independence, when city and cantonment were merged to create the new capital city of Mysore state, the park became a staging area for wary rapprochement, a safe space between MG Road and KG Road, right? And by, it also became the state's administrative center, the nucleus around which the four pillars of democracy swirled. because the judiciary is there in the form of the Karnataka High Court, settled into the Attara Kacheri. The state's original administrative offices, the Attara Kacheri was the state's original administrative offices. That's the judiciary. Both houses of legislature and the entire state cabinet moved into Vidhan Sauda across the road. The executive occupied the rather unimaginatively named multi-storied building beside the Sauda. And as for the fourth estate, the press, it not only scattered itself in various locations around the park's boundaries, but also crossing the imaginary lines between competing publications, met each evening to trade yarns at the press club inside the park. And yet, amid all the chaos that surrounded it, the park offered oases of silence and bird song and dappled shade to those who needed it. The park became Bangalore's meeting place, sanctuary, and thoroughfare, a place the city went to and went through. It was thus, over the years, that Cubbon Park became central to the Bangalorean heart, a welcoming buffer zone under an open, liberal sky, a capacious green sink with an ability to subsume not only carbon dioxide, but also a diversity of ideas and opinions. The park has always been a space that carries in itself the very DNA of the city that Kempegowda built. And that's why this Bangalore institution, built of equal parts nostalgia, habit, and pure love, is the hero of this book.
This is so lovely, and I should tell you, one of my favorite memories of Cubbon Park, which is a little bit of a tragic memory also, is my colleague Seema and I wrote Cities and Canopies. They wanted to do a photo shoot with us. So we went to Cubbon Park, which is, of course, the best place. I mean, now you can't take cameras in, but you could in those days. And we got sidetracked for almost an hour because there was a baby squirrel that fell out of the nest, and there were crows trying to get at it. So Seema, who's really good with animals, rescued this, and we kept the squirrel with us. We drove away the crows. We kept trying to keep her back. The mother was not coming. Eventually, one of the crows, we were just trying to move enough away that the squirrel would get it, but not enough. But the crow got the squirrel. But it also made us think that it's really a place where you can see these everyday interactions between nature and the city. And I mean, where do you get a chance to see something like this in the heart of Bangalore? But yet, I think it's also a welcoming place. When you come into Bangalore, and as you said, so many people are from Bangalore, but their parents are not from Bangalore. But we all feel Bangalorean after a few years in the city. And the parks, I think, have such a lot to do with it. And maybe that's what you do. You get into the park, and maybe if you go to the metro station, you see the little board that they have now on the trees in the city, the little board that gives you the history of the city now, which is an MG Road. And then maybe you take a journey, and maybe you pick up Rupa's book, which I think you should do, and get a sense of the history. So that brings me to my next question. I think there are many in the audience here who would be saying, okay, I didn't know this about Cubbon Park. So how would someone, a regular person who wants to know the history of the city, either learn about the history themselves or do research about this? I mean, you're saying, Sudeshna was saying very micro histories. I think we all need to do micro histories. We all need to know the places we go in. How would someone find out about their neighborhood?
So I can tell you how I found out. Of course, like I said, we had done some research into Bangalore's history because we were running these Bangalore walks. So actually, we don't realize it, but there are plenty of books available on Bangalore's history, written by very conscientious researchers, good storytellers. There is a bibliography in this book at the back about books about Bangalore that I have referenced, that I have referred to, which is very, very good also. So that is one way of doing it. But for me, I decided when I started writing this book that I would use this angle of Cubbon Park as the people's park, not so much about the trees of Cubbon Park, but the people of the park. Because it was never meant to be a botanical garden like Lal Bagh was. It was always meant to be just a park that added grandeur to the new public offices, which we today call the Attara Kacheri, which were designed by Richard Sankey. So he designed the park around it also and named it after Mark Cubbon, who was a commissioner of Bangalore in the 1800s for 27 years. A very beloved commissioner, I might add. Basically, the book is divided into two parts. One is the first 100 years of the park. First of all, I don't know how many of you know that the park has celebrated its 150 years 2 years ago. It's a really old park, and we somehow missed that anniversary, perhaps because COVID struck in 2020, so we were not able to celebrate it. So now it's 152 years old. So it's really part of our heritage. We don't think of parks as so much as part of our heritage as we think about buildings, but the trees are part of it. The first 100 years of history is quite well documented in so many books, but I was interested in the last 50 years also. of its history. So the only way I thought I could do this was to interview people who have been involved, Bangaloreans who know about the park, and look at old newspaper references. One of the people I interviewed was Bimal Desai, who is a theatre guy actually and an entrepreneur, who was instrumental in the Save Cubbon Park protests of 1998. And even before that, he was so upset about when the Atara Kachari was being extended, all the concrete used to be dumped into the park, all the debris. And just as a user of the park, just as a person who jogged in the park, it irked him so much that he got a lawyer and he filed a PIL in the High Court saying that what is happening to the park. And for me, that was the beginning of citizen activism, really. I mean, it's happened before also. When the Atara Kachari was going to be torn down, that a group of concerned Bangalore citizens got together and put a PIL, which was argued in the building that was going to be demolished. And it was the very first PIL. And so after that, Bangaloreans have taken to the PIL to their hearts. Anything, one tree is being cut down, PIL. Okay, so Cubbon Park is saved by citizen acts. How do you get information about those? So you talk to people. And luckily for me and for all of us, Bimal had meticulously maintained a giant file of newspaper cuttings of all the reportage that had gone on at that time. So that was one way of research. So that was, I got a little inroad into that, which others may not have, because 1998, there was no internet, so not as widespread as it is now. So it's impossible to find those stories on the internet, not so easy. But he had cuttings. Then I think a lot of history is also part of local lore. So you talk to people who have memories and they remember. So there's a lot of, I want to tell you that you just have to have an interest in finding out more. And information will present itself to you in so many ways. And the internet, what a beautiful thing it is. You just go down that rabbit hole, you start looking for Cubbon Park, it'll lead you somewhere, then there'll be some stray reference to it somewhere else, you jump in, you go down that rabbit hole, and in the end you end up with a nice kind of mosaic of what Cubbon Park was, is. That's the kind of research, yeah.
Lovely. And I think, see, one of the challenges I think we find even as researchers, I'm speaking from my own experiences, it's so hard to access the archives in India. It's much easier to access the British archives, unfortunately, than the Karnataka state archives that you have. But that said, once you do find that, you don't want to just go to archives and you want to go to people, there's so many older people who know fascinating stories. And Intac has these really nice micro-history exhibitions that they organize in different parts of the city where you can learn about Fraser Town or learn about Whitefield or whichever part of the city you're in. So I think one of the things we need to do to save and protect our city is to know its history, because only when you know the history, you care about it.
Unless you know it, you can't love it.
You can't love it.
Yeah.
I want to end with asking you, if you could just tell me two things. What was the most surprising thing that you encountered along the way? And maybe what's the thing that makes you most hopeful for Cubbon Park's future?
Many aha moments and surprising things were there. But I'll tell you a fascinating story of the fountain in Cubbon Park. All of you familiar with the fountain in Cubbon Park? Well, even that little fountain has a story. Who's involved in it is Sir Mirza Ismail, who became Diwan of Mysore after recommended, not after Vishveshwaraya, but recommended by Sir M.V. And he became Diwan in 1926. And he was instrumental in setting up the Brindavan Gardens. He was a keen gardener and all that. So he and Gustav Krumbiegel, who was the German gardener of the Maharaja, they set up this fabulous, of course, whoever is here and has been to Mysore must have seen the Brindavan Gardens. So they were set up, very lovely. And it finished, but the Mirza Ismail was always feeling a little bad that Bangalore doesn't have a fairy fountain. He called them fairy fountains. And Bangalore doesn't have, so he was always looking for some money from somewhere to make a fairy fountain in Bangalore. Around that time, he was approached by the Maharani of Bajang. Bajang is a principality in Nepal, and she was living in Bangalore. She had made a home in Bangalore. She approached him and said, Sir Mirza, I have this parrot, this pet parrot. Okay, very crazy about her parrot. And she said, after I'm gone, should something happen to me, will you promise to take care of my parrot? So Sir Mirza said, okay. And then she said, no, because you have this space in Lal Bagh. If some of you remember, I don't know if I remember from my childhood that there used to be animals. There used to be a little zoo in Lal Bagh.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and a little aviary.
Used to come and feed the deer.
Yeah, with deer and stuff. So she said, would you put it there and have my parrot taken care of? And Sir Mirza said, Madam, Your Royal Highness, please don't worry about the parrot. We'll definitely take care of it. Because she was pressing into his hands a sum of 5,000 rupees to take care of her parrot. And he said, he was looking at the money. And he said, I'll take care of your parrot, but can I use this money for something else? something for the people of Bangalore, which you'll be remembered for and all that. And she said, sure, what would you? He said, I want to set up a fairy fountain in Cubbon Park. Where else? Cubbon Park. So she said, okay, and he started work towards it. And sooner or later, within a 6-month period or a 1-year period, he ran out of money and more money was needed. So he went back to the Maharani. He said, if you can give me 3,000 rupees more, that fountain will be ready. And she said, okay, sure, and she gave him the money. And then she left for Bombay with her parrot and was never heard of again. But Bangalore got its fairy fountain because of a pet parrot. The most hopeful thing is the push and pull in Cubbon Park. There are walkers associations who prefer walkers over runners. They don't want the runners to run. There are runners associations who don't want everything to be concretized because they like running on mud paths. There are older people, senior citizens, who say we want concrete paths, otherwise mud paths will slip and fall, or it's uneven, we can't. Then there are people who want music in the park on Sunday mornings. Oh, there's such a beautiful bandstand, we must have musical performances and dance. There are other people who have sound pollution. There are people who want to ban all traffic into the park, and other people who need to get to their offices on the other side and will not take 0.6-kilometer detour to get there. They want to go through the park. And the police definitely don't want to close the park to traffic because Bangalore is congested enough already. This is an alternative route. We are not closing the park. So there's all this push and pull. And I think that is what will save Bangalore, especially because it is citizens, everyday citizens, and dogs. There's always some petition by walkers that we don't want dogs in the park, and all the dog owners saying, don't you have a heart? So it's all good. Everybody's constantly at war with each other, and that push and pull keeps the fulcrum, and center will hold. And I think Cubbon Park will stay.
That's lovely. Okay, so then I have one last thing that I would like to ask. What plans do you have for the next book?
Oh, next book? I think I'll just go back to writing for children now. I have done my foray into writing for adults in Bangalore, and I have a couple of books for children planned for next year. Thank you.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, BangaloreInternationalCenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.